RPG Day 2018, Day 15. Describe a tricky RPG experience you enjoyed. Hi, Bat here. So, initially I couldn't think of anything for this, and then once I did actually start remembering little things where I'd been socially anxious at the time, stressing about how a decision would pan out and affect the game or party cohesion, whether as a player or as a games master, then ideas started coming to me. It's like, oh yeah, this and that and these other games. So I put together a list. I whittled it down to a sort of smaller pie chart. So I've made a pie chart decision as normal. So I'll start off with a few LARP stories. I appreciate that this event's more based around tabletop. I'll get to those in a moment. So at LARP, in-character deaths can be super intense, and it's partly because you can't skip through the scene, to sort of, it could end up affecting the whole weekend or even longer if it's a long festival style LARP. And I'm not trying to say that LARP is different to tabletop in regards to player emotions. That's not the case. I'm a fan of all different types of roleplay. I just mean in regards to the scale of it, especially when you've got hundreds of players and you can't just easily walk away from a situation. If a large fraction of people are grieving, then you've really got nowhere else to go. You kind of have to be there and process the emotions. And that can be a bit too intense for some people because they've gone through it too many times in real life. And it's an aspect about LARP that I quite enjoy, is the way that mental health is, cathartically able to be dealt with. You can escape from being yourself, just like you can at tabletop. But at LARP it can be a negative thing as well, because the super intensity of it can keep building. So that's one thing that I found tricky on multiple occasions, especially when I was younger LARPing. And another thing that comes to mind is the logistics of running a LARP is on a scale that's different again to tabletop. You have to organise where the actual location is and the security aspects, first aid aspects, especially at a larger event. So mistakes are going to happen. And many years ago I was an NPC at one of the festival LARPs, and an out of character mistake happened to do with logistics for the game, but I was told it had to be resolved in character. And it's like, well, it wasn't a mistake out of character. Can't you just quickly rectify it? They're not happy, we're not happy, and other people, I'm sure, if they hear about it, will be rolling their eyes and going, got another problem. It's like, we don't have time for this, you deal with it. And to an extent I could understand, they're busy, the crew. So, as an NPC I'm part of the crew anyway. So we ended up having to resolve it, and I decided that we'd do it in character and let's treat it seriously. And went and spoke to the various parties concerned, the various factions, and worked out some deals and explained that it's not our fault, it's not their fault, it's this other group of individuals that, again, they were kind of in character, so there was a way to handle it. And afterwards, surprisingly, it kind of got handled really well. We'd actually done some wheeler dealing, and we've got some player characters involved as well. And later that night, well, 3 AM in the morning, a couple of the different NPCs approached me and said they were really happy with the way that I handled it and the fact that I involved the players in resolving problems, and basically got stuck on with it. So that was particularly tricky. And then I got thinking about sort of tabletop games where party cohesion and playing stuff together is obviously the norm. When the party's split up, it becomes a bit harder for the games master. It can also lead to the players potentially spending more time kind of getting disinterested in each other's actions. It depends on the group and the situation, so I know plenty of games where that's not the case. The Cthulhu party that's split up and everyone's like watching intently as individual characters go off and do something. So yeah, a Street Fighter campaign years ago where one of the player characters was kind of power hungry. Everybody kind of knew it. It's this kung fu practitioner with a dark streak, and one of the villains had approached the player character about joining them. Join me and I will teach you Din Mac. Bit more than that, but that's roughly the paraphrasing what was going on. And so the party was setting up an ambush. So whilst the other PCs were watching, they could just hear that their ally, their kung fu friend, was actually seriously considering joining the dark side. It wasn't quite the script they had in mind, and there was a bit of an awkward situation where they're like, "Well, you're going to betray the party," and it's like, "No, let's play it out." So we did. We played it out, and of course, in the end, the PC decided that they wouldn't betray the party, and everything was fine. And it was this wonderful moment because everyone's kind of laughing back on it, saying, "Oh God, it was so intense. It was such a difficult, like, do we need to now fight our brother? Is it going to be this incredible situation? Oh, how should we handle the game if it does end up being split?" And all these other aspects. And And I think it's a good example of how tricky can sort of overwhelm sometimes, you know, the emotional aspect. It's because you could argue that most role-playing experiences from a certain point of view can be viewed as tricky. But I think the craziest example is the Mage Mokalai game that I ran, which, again, I'm not really going to talk about because it's so over-the-top sounding and it's kind of breaking the rules, the metaphysics of the World of Darkness. And it wasn't by design. It sort of happened organically, and play involved random, sort of like the Chaos Attribute tables from Warm Fantasy Roleplay was an inspiration. The party end up at the Flux Realm, all these strange things are happening. They're supposed to, in my mind, figure out, you know, ways to get back to Earth and deal with their problems. And since they had access to nearly infinite power, I thought that's not going to be a problem. But, you know, running a game as a teenager, thinking everything's going to be fine, and then noticing that the players aren't quite going down the path that I thought they would. And yeah, they end up being part Mokalai, part mages. And the reason I'm bringing that up is it was tricky because there's being in a sandbox game where you've got little hooks planned for the campaign and you've talked to the players and they've got all their own plans set up, and effectively ended up playing a wildly different game. It was so far out of the sandbox to be in a different dimension, in this case literally. It was just, you know, I don't tend to do that type of game of over the top power levels, and you know, like you can't have these combinations of vampire, changeling, werewolves. You can't be, you know, both a paladin and a death knight at the same time in D&D terms. That would be ridiculous. Oh, oops, we've accidentally somehow allowed that to happen. Oh well, let's deal with it. So it was tricky in regards to, well, effectively, let's throw this sandbox out now and we're technically playing a different game.